Early Doors was once a warm, gentle story about friendship and working-class life in early 2000s England. But 22 years later, the real lives of its cast couldn't be more different. Scandals erupted, marriages collapsed, debts piled up, health deteriorated, and sudden deaths left their colleagues stunned. What dragged them into this cruel spiral? Join us as we uncover each story. John Henshaw as Ken Dixon. John Henshaw was born on the 20th of October 1952 in Ancoats, Manchester, England. At 51 years old, John played Ken Dixon, the kind-hearted, clumsy landlord who held the pub together, in Early Doors in 2003. His warmth, humor, and soft-edged authority made Ken one of British television's most beloved pub figures. But behind that gentle screen presence, his private life was carrying a far heavier story. His marriage to Irfinview in 1985 began with stability, but hardship struck early. When a workplace accident ended his manual labor career, the sudden loss of income left him dependent on temporary jobs, creating constant tension at home. Irfinview carried most of the household burden while he chased small acting roles, and resentment slowly crept into their marriage. By 2008, everything collapsed at once. John admitted to losing nearly £50,000 to gambling, a secret he had hidden for years. Irfinview confronted him after discovering a stack of unpaid loans in his coat pocket, and the resulting confrontation nearly ended their 23-year marriage. Their 2 children witnessed shouting matches, nights spent apart, and the emotional fallout that followed his confession. The stress dug deep into his health. During rehearsals for The League of Gentlemen, John suffered a severe hypertensive episode that left him trembling and unable to speak for several minutes. Doctors warned him his blood pressure was dangerously high, a direct result of anxiety and gambling withdrawal. He later collapsed in a dressing room while filming Goodnight Sweetheart, his body giving out after weeks of insomnia and migraines triggered by relentless guilt. Recovery forced him into counseling, and although he stayed with Irfinview, the strain of rebuilding trust left him exhausted and physically weakened for years. Today, John Henshaw is 73 years old and still acting in Manchester, choosing local theater and small film roles that keep him close to his rebuilt family life. His estimated net worth is around $4 million earned through steady work, voiceover jobs, and national advertising campaigns that finally brought him financial stability after decades of turmoil. Craig Cash as Joe. Craig Cash was born on the 11th of September 1960 in Salford, Manchester, England. At 43 years old, Craig played Joe, the lazy, lovable joker whose throwaway lines shaped the show's entire rhythm, in Early Doors in 2003, appearing in all 12 episodes as both co-writer and core cast. His dry humor and quiet melancholy became the emotional signature of the series. Yet behind the effortless comedy, his personal life was collapsing under pressures he rarely spoke about publicly. His marriage to Caroline Henry in 1980 began during his earliest struggles as a young DJ and aspiring writer, but success came slowly, and the gap between his ambition and reality widened into constant conflict. Arguments over unpaid bills, his obsessive late-night writing sessions, and months spent away working on the royal family pushed their relationship to breaking point. The final blow came in 2005, when an affair he later admitted in his memoir became tabloid scandal, and Caroline filing for temporary custody of their children. The divorce tore him apart emotionally, and for a time he quit writing entirely, convinced he had destroyed the one stable part of his life. The fallout from that collapse seeped directly into his health. Cash developed severe anxiety during the legal dispute with the BBC over accusations of crude comedy in the royal family, and the stress triggered recurring stomach ulcers that left him unable to eat properly during filming of The Café. In 2006, he reportedly experienced a panic-induced blackout while recording narration. He entered therapy after severe insomnia left him bedridden for days, his body finally shutting down after years of pressure, heartbreak, and relentless creative expectation. Now, Craig Cash is 65 years old and continues to write in Manchester, maintaining a quieter life with his second wife, Stephanie Davies, whom he married in 2000. He divides his time between script writing, directing, and raising his two sons, Billy and Harry. His estimated net worth of around $5 million comes largely from long-term royalties on the royal family, Rodney Litchfield as Tommy. Rodney Litchfield was born on the 3rd of February 1939 in Wigan, Lancashire, England. At 64 years old, Rodney played Tommy, the miserly, sharp-tongued pensioner who avoided buying drinks, in Early Doors in 2003, appearing as one of the show's most memorable recurring characters. His dry humor and withdrawn presence quietly transformed him from a lifelong supporting actor into an unexpected standout. His private life, however, was far harsher than the characters he portrayed. Rodney's first marriage, to Margaret Turner in the early 1960s, began with hope, but unraveled after 2 decades of relentless financial pressure. When the coal industry collapsed and he spent years unemployed, arguments over unpaid bills and the fear of losing their home became a daily reality. Margaret eventually filed for divorce, telling him she could not endure another year of instability. The separation crushed him, and the emotional fallout followed him onto set years later. Even when he appeared in Coronation Street in the 1990s, he carried the weight of that broken marriage, often arriving straight from nights spent awake with chest tightness caused by stress. His second marriage to Linda Chapman offered comfort at first, but the demands of filming Phoenix Nights and later Sunshine created a new strain. Long shoots in Manchester kept him away from home for days, leaving Linda to care for their 2 children alone. The guilt overwhelmed him, and in 1999 he suffered a minor collapse during rehearsals, later diagnosed as an anxiety-related fainting episode linked to chronic exhaustion. Years of cigarette smoke from his mining days worsened his breathing, and he developed persistent bronchitis that made every winter painful. Even as he pushed through each role, his body bore the marks of carrying too much for too long. Sadly, Rodney Litchfield died on the 5th of September 2020 at the age of 81, passing away from natural causes after years of declining health. At the time of his death, his estimated net worth was around $500,000, the sum of a lifetime of steady roles and a modest property in Wigan that remained his final anchor, Peter Wight as Nige. Peter Wight was born in 1950 in Worthing, Sussex, England. At 53 years old, Peter played Nige, the clumsy, corrupt, and unintentionally hilarious policeman. In Early Doors in 2003, appearing in nearly every episode and becoming one of the show's comedic pillars. His understated timing and weary expression gave the series its uniquely British charm, even when the spotlight was rarely his. His private life, however, was far less humorous. Peter married actress Catherine Hunter in 1991. By the late 1990s, the strain became brutal. Overlapping rehearsals, months-long theater runs abroad, and Peter's growing insecurity as he struggled to land major roles despite his RADA training. Their marriage finally cracked in 2005 when Catherine discovered his affair with a fellow cast member during a touring production. The breakup shattered him emotionally. Even when he appeared in Hot Fuzz, his face carried the heaviness of a man living with consequences he created but could not undo. The weight of these years manifested physically. Peter developed chronic gastritis brought on by stress and years of poor eating while working back-to-back theater seasons. During the filming of The Imitation Game, he reportedly collapsed backstage from dehydration after consecutive late-night shoots, a moment that forced him to temporarily step away from acting. His doctor warned him that the combination of anxiety and overwork could escalate into something far worse. Since then, he has avoided long television commitments, choosing steadier stage work where he could control his schedule and avoid the emotional chaos that once cost him a marriage and nearly his health. Now, Peter Wight is 75 years old and continues to work in London, dedicating most of his time to theater and teaching acting to younger performers. He lives alone, having chosen stability and solitude over another attempt at marriage. His estimated net worth of around $3 million comes from decades of film appearances, Hollywood projects like Hot Fuzz, and his steady income from theater instruction. Rita May as Jean Dixon. Rita May was born in 1949 in Oldham, England. At 54 years old, Rita played Jean Dixon, the sharp-tongued, meddling, and hilariously judgmental mother-in-law. In early doors in 2003, appearing in all 12 episodes and becoming one of the sitcom's most unforgettable forces. Her natural wit, impeccable timing, and fearless delivery turned Jean into a British comedy icon. Her first marriage in the early 1970s, to factory worker Geoffrey Wilkinson, slid quickly into chaos as his alcoholism escalated. By the early 1980s, emotional outbursts, nights spent waiting for him to come home, and the constant fear of violence pushed her to the breaking point. The divorce in 1985 left her financially drained and terrified she would never rebuild her life. When she entered acting in her 40s, she reportedly broke down after a scene involving a drunk husband in Shameless, admitting it mirrored her own past too closely. The failure of a major stage production in 2000 then sent her into a severe depressive spell that lasted months, forcing her to seek therapy just to regain enough stability to continue performing. The loneliness that followed shaped the next 3 decades of her life. Rita never remarried and never had children, and she later admitted to The Guardian that watching friends become grandparents plunged her into a quiet grief she carried silently. During her 5-year unemployment stretch in the 1990s, she suffered from stress-induced weight loss and persistent insomnia caused by the repeated rejection of being labeled too old for lead roles. Even during her acclaimed run on Vera, she often returned to an empty home, battling episodes of isolation so heavy she once considered quitting acting entirely. The pressure, however, pushed her into some of her finest work, including her BAFTA-nominated role in Shameless. Today, Rita May is 76 years old and still living healthily in Manchester, focusing on selective television projects and involvement in local theater. Her estimated net worth is around $2 million, earned through long-term TV contracts and carefully managed property investments. Christine Bottomley as Melanie Dixon. Christine Bottomley was born on the 27th of April, 1979 in Halifax, England. At 24 years old, Christine played Melanie Dixon, Ken's lively, outspoken stepdaughter inside the pub, in Early Doors in 2003. Her warmth and quick wit helped balance the show's older, heavier characters. Yet while her character thrived on screen, her private life held a far more fragile reality. Her marriage to Damian Lewis in 2007 began with confidence, but the imbalance in their careers quickly created a rift. Neither of them could ignore Damian's Hollywood rise meant months spent filming in the U.S., while Christine remained in the U.K. fighting to escape the young girl stereotype left in the shadow of Early Doors. Each separation grew longer, each reunion more strained. By 2013, arguments centered on missed birthdays, canceled plans, and Damian's growing absence from their children's daily life. The turning point came in 2015 when they entered marriage counseling after a bitter confrontation about his long overseas shoot, during which she had handled 2 sick children alone. What began as passion became distance, and Christine carried the emotional burden in silence while trying to keep the family functioning. The strain soon showed in her health. Years of pressure triggered recurring panic episodes during her work on The Tunnel, and she once had to step out of set mid-scene. Chronic insomnia followed, leaving her functioning on 2 or 3 hours of sleep during the filming of Vera balancing motherhood. An unpredictable career left her emotionally depleted, and she quietly withdrew from several high-profile auditions during this period simply because her body could not handle the pace. As of 2025, Christine Bottomley is 46 years old and living in London, continuing to act steadily in television dramas while guarding her private life more carefully than ever. Her estimated net worth is around $1.8 million US, earned from 2 decades of television work, audio drama awards, and a commitment to rebuilding her career after years of emotional and physical strain. Lisa Millett as Debbie. Lisa Millett was born in 1977 in Manchester, England. At 26 years old, Lisa played Debbie, Tanya's cheerful, chatty best friend, in Early Doors in 2003. Her lightness on screen made the pub feel alive. But once the cameras stopped, her life moved in a direction far heavier than the character she portrayed. Her marriage, which began in 2008 with Paul Whitaker, unraveled slowly under the weight of career frustration and financial uncertainty. After Early Doors, casting directors repeatedly dismissed her as too sitcom-coded, shutting her out of major auditions she had spent years preparing for. Every rejection fed new arguments at home. Bills overdue, childcare disputes, and Paul's mounting resentment as he became the primary earner. By 2018, their relationship collapsed completely when the custody battle over their daughter turned bitter. Court hearings stretched for months, each session reopening wounds she was desperate to close. The fight drained her emotionally, leaving her unable to work consistently and forcing her to step away from several theater roles she had already accepted. The stress of the legal battle soon manifested physically. During her period of unemployment in 2012, she suffered from severe tension headaches and shortness of breath, conditions worsened by the anxiety of being unable to secure stable acting work. In 2014, shortly after a guest role on Holby City, she experienced a panic episode backstage so intense she had to be escorted to urgent care for evaluation. The doctor warned her that prolonged stress could trigger long-term heart complications if she continued pushing herself without rest. She returned to theater cautiously, taking smaller roles to rebuild her confidence after a decade of emotional and physical strain. Now, Lisa Millett is 48 years old and working as a freelance actress across the UK, balancing television auditions with regional theater productions while raising her daughter. Her estimated net worth is around $1 million US, earned through years of mixed TV work, stage performances, and careful financial rebuilding after a marriage and career that tested her more deeply than the public ever knew James McAvoy as Liam. James McAvoy was born on 21st April 1979 in Glasgow, Scotland. At 24 years old, James played Liam, the shy, soft-spoken youngster who drifted in and out of the pub with a mix of awkward charm and quiet uncertainty, in Early Doors in 2003. Though a small role, it was one of the final steps before his explosion into global fame. Yet while his career rose with impossible speed, his private life was tightening into knots he struggled to untangle. His marriage to Anne-Marie Duff in 2006 began with deep affection, forged on the set of Shameless, but the pressures of fame quickly widened the cracks that neither of them initially saw. As his schedule filled with back-to-back films, from Narnia to Atonement, Anne-Marie stayed home with their newborn son Michael, often handling months of parenthood alone while he shot on the other side of the world. Arguments ignited over missed milestones, canceled holidays, and his growing emotional distance. By 2015, their home had turned into alternating silences and late-night conversations that circled the same unresolved pain. Their divorce in 2016 came after a final confrontation about his inability to slow down, leaving both of them emotionally raw as they attempted to co-parent under one roof for their son's sake. The turmoil seeped into his health. After filming Filth, where he pushed himself deep into psychologically dark territory, James suffered severe insomnia that spiraled into anxiety attacks during the press tour for Split. At one point, he fainted in a makeup chair after days of near sleeplessness, combined with the strain of hiding his collapsing marriage from the media. The emotional strain followed him into his new relationship with Lisa Liberati, creating tension as he attempted to rebuild stability while still carrying the remnants of grief from his first marriage. Today, James McAvoy is 46 years old and continues acting in major international projects while directing his first feature film, California Skimmin'. He lives between London and Philadelphia with Lisa Liberati and their young son, embracing a quieter personal life after decades of emotional turbulence. His estimated net worth is around $3 million US, built from his long list of acclaimed roles, franchise work, and stage productions that shaped him into one of the most versatile actors of his generation, Maxine Peake as Janice. Maxine Peake was born on the 14th of July, 1974, in Bolton, England. At 29 years old, Maxine played Janice, the tough, outspoken single mother who brought raw honesty into early doors, in the series' 2003 first season. Her presence added grit and vulnerability to the pub's chaotic world, yet the reality behind her performance carried far more turbulence than the character ever revealed. Her marriage, which ended in 2010, was shaped by the same battles she fought in her public life. Maxine married Paul Wintoniuk in the early 2000s, just as her role in Shameless launched her into sudden fame. But the pressure of filming long hours, combined with Paul's struggle to adjust to her political activism and growing public visibility, created daily tension. Arguments often centered around her left-wing speeches, press interviews, attacking austerity, and the backlash that spilled into their home. By 2009, the divide had grown severe. Paul wanted privacy. Maxine refused to silence herself. Their final separation occurred after a heated dispute tied to tabloid criticism of her political remarks. The marriage ended abruptly, leaving her emotionally fractured and carrying guilt for choosing her convictions over domestic peace. The aftermath struck her health with force. Stress from the divorce coincided with the intense physical demands of performing in Hamlet, triggering recurring bouts of vertigo and severe migraines during rehearsals. By 2011, during her run in Silk, she developed chronic throat strain from overworking her voice on stage while simultaneously doing political speaking tours. A doctor later warned her that one more prolonged episode could permanently damage her vocal cords, forcing her to cancel several engagements and confront how deeply the emotional battles of the previous decade had worn her down. As of 2025, Maxine Peake is 51 years old and continues to work across film, theater, and political performance art. She lives in Greater Manchester with partner Paolo Wintoniuk, focusing on roles that align with her social beliefs. Her estimated net worth of around $3.5 million US comes from a long, acclaimed career on stage and screen. Lee Ingleby as Dean. Lee Ingleby was born on 28th January 1976 in Burnley, Lancashire, England. At 27 years old, Lee played Dean, the jittery, soft-hearted lad who balanced nerves and comedy, in Early Doors in 2003. His small but memorable presence added innocence to the pub's rough edges. But the man behind the role faced battles far heavier than Dean's mild awkwardness ever revealed. His long-term relationship with partner Emma Chambers began quietly in the late 1990s. At the same time, his career was struggling to find direction. The first major fracture appeared when Lee began filming Inspector George Gently in 2007, a commitment that kept him away from home for months. Emma repeatedly confronted him about his emotional absence, and arguments escalated as his fame grew. By 2012, the strain broke them. Emma ended the relationship after a final argument about his refusal to slow down or seek help for his growing mood swings. The breakup left him devastated, especially as they had quietly been trying for a child for years without success. The emotional fallout triggered a series of physical issues. During the filming of The A Word in 2016, Lee began experiencing panic episodes severe enough to halt production for several minutes. Tight chest, shaking hands, and dizziness that left him gripping furniture to stay upright. Stress induced chronic gastritis, and he lost nearly a stone in weight while juggling Bob the Builder voice sessions and theater commitments. His sleep deteriorated during the Criminal, UK shoot, where late-night filming worsened his anxiety until he finally sought medical treatment. Doctors warned him that the combination of overwork and unresolved grief from his failed long-term relationship was compromising his health more seriously than he realized. Today, Lee Ingleby is 49 years old and continues acting steadily in television, film, and audio dramas. He divides his time between London and the north of England, maintaining a more private and guarded personal life. His estimated net worth of around $2 million comes from decades of consistent work across screen roles. Phil Mealey as Duffy. Phil Mealey was born in 1963 in Manchester, England. At 40 years old, he played Duffy, Joe's cheeky, loyal sidekick, in Early Doors in 2003, becoming a defining part of the show's humor while co-writing every episode behind the scenes. His easy grin on screen hid a life marked by battles far heavier than any pub banter. The shift into his private life began long before Early Doors existed. Phil married his wife, Sarah, in 1990, and for years they juggled his unstable stand-up gigs with raising their 3 children. But the collapse of his 1990s comedy tours, including one infamous night where an entire audience walked out, sent him into a spiral. He drank heavily to cope with the humiliation, and Sarah spent nights picking him up from venues where he sat alone after shows. Her own emotional strength finally cracked in 2015 when she was diagnosed with clinical depression, leaving Phil to manage her treatment appointments while carrying the financial weight of a writing career that was constantly on the edge of failure. The pressure worsened during the Early Doors live revival. While the 2018 show was a hit, the canceled 2020 tour due to COVID shattered him. Besides, managing Sarah's condition while watching his biggest professional comeback disappear overnight triggered severe migraines and heart palpitations that forced him into brief medical leave. Even writing episodes for the royal family brought new tension. Every time a public argument broke out between Craig Cash and the BBC, Phil was dragged into legal meetings he emotionally had no space for, juggling scripts with hospital visits for his wife's medication adjustments. Now, Phil Mealey is 62 years old, living quietly in Salford and continuing to write, though at a slower pace to protect his health and family stability. His estimated net worth of around $2 million comes from years of screenwriting, touring work, and royalties. Modest earnings built through resilience, loyalty, and a private life far tougher than his warm on-screen charm ever revealed. Which story shocked you the most? And whose journey do you want us to explore next? Hit like, leave your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe for more untold truths behind your favorite shows.